I'm going to record it there. Yeah, so we are just recording this so that we can place it later onto the Nerdy Shop Talk website and onto the eLearning Guild YouTube site. You can see it there as well. And welcome to Nerdy Shop Talk, where we, Julie and I, wanted to have some sort of chat with some experts in the industry, friends and peers and colleagues that we know that are experts in different sorts of topics. And we have found at different events that we go to, or just some of these chats, we have some of our best learning moments when we're having these really conversations that are just very informal about different types of talks. And we wanted to open that up and let others eavesdrop in on those conversations. And today we're going to talk about xAPI with Megan and Sean. And I'm going to introduce my co-host, Julie, who is an instructional designer and the author of Design for How People Learn. It's one of the best-selling instructional design books available. So we'll give a plug out to that. And she's also been recognized as a guild master by the eLearning Guild.
Yeah, and I'll just introduce Tracy really quickly for anybody who's not familiar. Tracy Parrish is just one of those fabulous people who gets a lot of things done. She's an educational technology specialist. She does instructional design, project management, development, all the pieces. She's a frequent speaker, and she's an articulate community hero and a moderator of Learn Chat. And she also has a fantastic collection of free e-learning resources, which we will put a link to that in the show notes when we post the video. So. Yeah, so xAPI, what is it good for? So,
okay, that's better than what is it? So we're one step in.
Right, exactly. So yeah, one of the big issues with xAPI is it's been around for a while and we've been having a lot of conversations about it. But one of the things that I find is that the conversations tend to be more, kind of the actual technical people, which totally makes sense. It's a technical spec and, our standard and all of these kinds of things. But at a certain point, I think one of the things that I'm still trying to work out as a designer is what can I do with it as a designer? What kinds of things, if I come at it from this sort of pure instructional design point of view, should I be thinking about when I'm thinking about xAPI and what's possible right now and all of those kinds of things. So that's largely the topic that we wanted to address. And we thought Megan and Sean would both be fantastic people to involve in this because of the people who I know that are in the xAPI space, I think that you're the two people that I see, and lots of other people are as well, but like of the people that I know are the most focused on what can we actually do with this? What's possible with some of the authoring tools? How can we actually start to use this instead of kind of theorizing about what's an option? And that's always part of the hype cycle, right? There's a lot of theorizing before we start to see actual case examples. But the fact that you've, from the beginning, been really focused on okay, how do we get stuff done with it has been, I think, phenomenal. And that's why that's why Tracy and I both wanted you to come in and talk about this topic. All right. So we'll go ahead and start with actually that first question that we theoretically had moved on, but assuming that there are going to be some people who are watching this who are maybe not super familiar with xAPI, I am sure that over the years you have both honed your what is xAPI explanation. So what's your good elevator pitch for what xAPI is? Oops, sorry.
It's that.
Yeah, that summarizes it perfectly.
Bella the terrier apparently has opinions about these things. So.
I think the thing that I've always gone to with this, it's a tough question to summarize it because, and I don't, Megan, you might disagree with this, but I always tend to get too technical very quickly. So I think I've kind of boiled it down to it's a really consistent way to get granular data. And or it gives you the possibility. I mean, that's really what the tenet of it is consistency and, getting out of sort of that high level data of completions, test scores, things like that.
Yeah, and I look at it as absolutely that. So ditto your dog, ditto Sean. But there's a couple of things, right? So one is how do you get a grasp around what you can do with it? And I have my phone story that I do that with. But I think there's I relate it to SCORM in that SCORM is like a vocabulary, right? So there's 5 simple things I can talk about. I mean, there's like 20 things that SCORM does between an e-learning course and its LMS. Only 5 of which, as instructional designers, we care about. The rest are things that the geeks care about, like session state and things like that. But the and I love my geeks, but but the so the SCORM, right? You're only talking about 5 relatively shallow things, and it allows an LMS to know all the reports you will ever need to run out of that LMS, because it knows all the data you will ever have out of your learning content, because it's those 5 things. And it's remarkably consistent, to Sean's point, right? SCORM is remarkably consistent. It's funky, right? The little around the edges, I call it the dialects of SCORM. But it has enabled the e-learning industry to exist and thrive and grow to where it is. It means that each one of us sitting in our kitchen or a home office can build e-learning that will fit in the Fortune 500's LMSs, and the Fortune 500 can change, and any government and any company globally can change LMSs, and still all their e-learning works. Right? So SCORM is actually, as much as we like to bash it, it's been really good for us. It's been really limited. Instead of a vocabulary, then I think of xAPI as a grammar. As long as I follow the grammar of that sentence, I can say anything I want to, which opens up an amazing amount of possibilities, right? It also, I remember the early days of Twitter, and people like posting pictures of their peanut butter sandwiches and like talking about dribble, and there's no way to sort out the meaning to it. And now it's a finely honed business tool that you pay people tens of thousands of dollars to consult on your Twitter strategy, right? So that's come together. That's a really long answer, sorry. I had some Mountain Dew before this, so apologizing in advance.
Excellent. Well, I would like, I know you both have been grossly in using it for so long, not the right words there, but do you have some, not the right words at all. You've been
Depends on the day.
a long time. You've been showing others how to use it for a long time. Have you found some really cool examples of where it has been used? Have you had some really cool experience of, unique kind of things?
Can I tell you one of my favorite examples is Sean's?
Please.
So Sean, go for it.
Yeah, and one of mine actually is Megan's too. So we'll just promote each other here. Yeah, one of the first example that we did way back in the first ADL cohort was we actually used xAPI to track mouse clicks within our software. So I work for a software company in my day job, and we built a little wrapper that we stuck on the software that would record each mouse click that then we could tie to e-learning so that we could show proficiency inside of the software, give pointed help in those areas where someone was deemed, I guess, not proficient, and then go back in and retest them to see if they were proficient. So xAPI provided that nice granular, I guess, kind of consistent way that we could track what people were doing within the software without, having to completely, build something into the software. We kind of scraped data that was already there. And, I think that's something I've seen a lot of examples that people are doing that type of thing now, is scraping existing data and just sort of reformatting a little bit with xAPI into something useful.
Yeah, and you did the thing where you were comparing, like, so here's the expert path through the software if everybody's kind of doing everything right, and then here's what, tracking what a user, like a newer user might do, and seeing where they were sort of deviating from the expert path. And
right. Yep. So we were using a click-based and a time-based from that expert to sort of novice comparison.
So with an example like that, do you need to know about what you want to track before you even start? Or is that something you can just kind of on the fly go, hey, we really want to know about this, and then throw it in?
I'm starting to laugh about that because I tell the story a lot when I present on this, that we did not go into it knowing what we wanted. And we just sort of we were flying by the seat of our pants, and we said, okay, well, we got this great thing. Let's send it to a training class. And we got 60,000 statements back, or pieces of data back in 24 hours. Wow. And then we were like, oh crap, what do we do with this now?
So, I'm just putting the link to your book in the chat, Sean.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and so in that case, yeah, we had to go in and sort of wade through a bunch of data. So, in hindsight, I would definitely go back and plan and figure out and try and see what we wanted to track. But no, we did not have a good plan in that particular instance of what we were going to do. And it took a little bit of reverse engineering to get to that.
I have an opinion though. I was talking with somebody the other day, right? So, and I'm, my other big passion in life is, because I'm such a massive nerd, is agile project management, right? And iterative development. And so we were talking with a client the other day, and I said, look, we're doing a lot of data planning. I mean, we're down to data strategy and who needs it and why, and what's the consumers and the producers of data and how you're going to organize it to get your stuff out, all this. I said, but we're going to do this in your first set of data. You're going to be so excited, right? It's a live moment. And then you look at it and you're like, my God, my baby is ugly. Because your first set of data, Megan on a Friday afternoon, fueled by Mountain Dew. Your first set of data, you're going to look at it and you're going to be all excited. And I've got data and I could say a couple of things, but now I have a lot more questions. So I think having a little bit extra data is a nice thing. Going into it knowing that it'll take a few rounds to be able to figure out what you really want. I really believe so. So now I've got at least one client of mine out there who's like, all right, I'm looking for my ugly baby.
Yeah. And I would totally agree with that. It's especially on that first project. I mean, we didn't know what we didn't know. I would have liked to have planned that one better. I think the big thing there is we were probably a little bit optimistic of what we could do. And it was a pretty large project. It probably would have behooved us to start a little smaller. And then, yeah, I would say collect all the data you can on that first small project to understand. We probably got in a little over our heads pretty quickly, but yeah, we did learn from it. So I guess it wasn't all bad.
Yeah, I still think of one of the examples that I've heard that I think you could use xAPI for in different things, but just the question of like, is anybody using our support resources? Like that's a nice kind of reasonably consistent question, right? Like, we've put all these help resources into an e-learning program or onto a website or something like that. And you could just track and see which ones are people regularly accessing. Is anybody ever accessed this one over here? Some of those kinds of things. Like that's a hopefully less than 60,000 pieces of data in 24 hours kind of question. But
yeah, I think that's a very good use case. In fact, if anyone was at DevLearn or going to future conferences, including the xAPI party coming up at Torrance Learning next week, Llamasoft is doing just that. So their first xAPI project, they wanted to know if people were watching the videos in their help system. And that was, it was a lot of effort on their part to build those videos. So they were just curious what was the usage. And that was the first project they jumped on. So that is absolutely a great use case. And I think it really ties in well with your topic today of just how can designers use it? I mean, just getting that understanding of, okay, we're putting a lot of effort into this thing to support our users. Are people actually looking at it?
Yeah. So Megan, what about you?
So are we back to your favorite project?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I'm going to go old school, just like Sean did, right? So our first commercially viable xAPI project was for the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum. And what we did, so it's a children's science museum and they have field trips. And they just have random visitors too, but they wanted to build something special for field trip groups where exhibit labels would be interactive and targeted to a particular grade level or curriculum, and then also tracked back to their to the specific statewide curriculum standards. And there's a few things there that we did then, and actually now I've got a side project that I'm doing right now, going back in and analyzing the data that's there. So I'm glad that we're sending a gob of data that 5 years later I was like, hey, now I want that stuff. But we're using xAPI there for a few different things, right? So one is SCORM. One of the things that SCORM does is tracks one user at a time, one e-learning course at a time, everybody logged into the LMS. What we're doing at the Hands-On Museum is using beacons so that an exhibit label recognizes you. But we can track, because kids move around in little packs when they go to a field trip. And so a group of kids will come up, and we're tracking a group of interactions all at once. Where, probably most of the people who are logged in right now for this, have you ever gotten a call from some manager in the organization? It's like, okay, so I just sat my entire team down in the conference room in front of your e-learning course. Can I get them all credit for it? I'm the only one who got credit for it because nobody else got completed by watching it on the conference room. So we did that with the museum, where multiple people can have their interactions scored all at the same time, which was pretty cool. But we're tracking a lot of deep data about what they're doing. And now what we're looking at is taking a second pass at the data. So at first we were just looking at interaction, like who stays there and how long, and what kinds of things did they type in. I love gathering free text, right? But now we're looking at, based on the type of interaction, does that drive longer or more quality engagement with each of those learning pieces? And so we're going to slice that data that way. And so I'm super geeked about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. No, that's great. So, by the way, and I just want to remind everybody who's logged in, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're happy to kind of add your questions into the conversation. So, one of the big challenges, I think, is that a lot of people in e-learning are solo practitioners or small teams, and they're working with rapid authoring tools and an LMS or something like that. But the question kind of comes up of how do what can some of those people do to get started, or some ways that they can kind of get their feet wet with this a little bit.
Is now when I get to talk about the cohort again?
Sure.
So, I mean, and it would feel like a shameless plug if it wasn't like free and available to everybody. So there's a lot of ways to, right? So, I mean, here's what I will say. If you have an e-learning authoring package of some sort, you already have the ability, I'd put good money on it, you already have the ability to publish and send xAPI data. Most of the authoring packages that people in this space have in corporate learning already send that data. And actually, Tracy, we're even pulling it further. If you can do me a favor while I talk and type xapicohort.com into the chat, we're pulling it further away from Torrance Learning, because I really don't want people to call it the Torrance Learning Cohort, so we bought it in its own website. So you can already send data. It may be very shallow, but you've already got that. You need to of course have a place to catch it, but and it's e-learning, right? So the whole point of xAPI is that you can get more than just e-learning, but everybody can start. You don't have to spend any money. You can send data today with a free trial of any LRS account, and then you can start at least exploring the fact that you can get more depth out of your data. And then in the cohort, it's a free virtual 12-week learning experience that we offer spring and fall. And people come together. We average about 650 people signed up, and have an opportunity for people to get in, form teams, play, do something, make something. This session, we have people doing things with Storyline, things with Captivate, things with video, things with Alexa, things with Unity 3D, all like just crazy awesome projects.
Can you give an example of like a Storyline usage that you've seen?
Yeah. Actually, there's a great one. Jonathan Rock is he's done the cohort several semesters, and he's building one right now. It's a little bit meta, a little bit funky on the edges. He is building his project, or his team's project. There's a group of them working on it, Izzy, Lara, and a couple other people, who are using Storyline to create a really almost a multifaceted assessment checklist that an instructor or observer would use to evaluate someone's Dungeons and Dragons gameplay. And I know, right? But and so like and it's like, I mean, it is all loaded up with Dungeons and Dragons. But if you look at it, it's really awesome. So what he's asking for in there, right? It starts off with, what role character are you? So it's evaluating how you are rated on each of the different things. Like, do you rush into fights or protect other people or disappear from your traveling party? I know nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, right? But it's doing that relative to, are you playing your role? So it's actually it's very, very deep and cool. But along several different vectors of performance, he's keeping track of what are you doing and how are you doing it? And it'll allow an instructor or the game master to rate people. And he's doing it in Storyline. So Storyline captures right? So think about that. Storyline captures who is the rater, the instructor, the observer, who is the performer, the ratee, right, the player, and then how they're doing that. And he's leveraging Storyline for that. You can also build that in Survey Gizmo. You can build that in straight up code, custom code. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can do.
All right.
Yeah. Are one of the like typical authoring tools better than another, do you think, for doing that?
Yes.
Okay. And
well, so for doing that, right? So
like,
I
what are
think
some of the pros and cons of the different ones that you can think of?
Yeah. So we're allowed to name names here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'll say out of the box, Storyline gives him a lot of flexibility in what everything is and where it goes on the page and whatnot, and Captivate would too. Storyline and Captivate allow, and I'll talk about those first simply because they're the ones that most people have. Right? They have really SCORM-like data. Unless you're extending it with JavaScript, they have really SCORM-like data. And I'll let Sean jump in just a second, but like if you're looking for more data about what happens on a screen instead of just that somebody was in the general presence of a screen while it played somewhere on the internet, Domino and Lectora do a better job of allowing you to see what happens on that screen. Smart Builder will allow you to choose what it is that you're gathering data from on that screen. So those are pretty from the e-learning authoring side. Do you want to jump in, Sean, on some of the stuff you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It's very SCORMy out of Captivate and Storyline. You know, as you kind of alluded to, if you do have a little bit of JavaScript, and I'm not a developer scripter by any stretch of the imagination, and now there actually is a ton of code out on the web that you can search for with Storyline and Captivate, or xAPI, which generates for Storyline, which Megan will put into the chat there. But it's those two systems, Storyline and Captivate. If you are comfortable doing a bit of coding, you can extend those way beyond their basics. So out of the box, you're going to get your, so-and-so actor visited or experienced a slide, and you're going to get one of those from every single slide they go to in Captivate or Storyline. You're going to get if they attempted a quiz question, you'll get that was attempted. Buried within the xAPI output, you'll get what answer they put in and what the correct answer was, those sorts of things. But you won't get any of that in-page data. And to me, that's what we're looking for. And that's one of the big advantages of xAPI is, and again, sort of relating it to the designer. If I'm building all of these things into a page within my course, I want to know how people are interacting with those. And especially if I'm building in any sort of branching mechanisms, I really want to know how people are interacting with that. An example of that I always loved was a company called MedStar out on the East Coast had built, and Megan's laughing because she's probably heard me use
this story. This is a good one.
1,000,000 times. But they were using, I think it was Storyline, but one of the rapid tools to develop an e-learning course for Code Blue training, cardiac arrest training, and they put it out to a bunch of people. So it was a blended learning package, all xAPI enabled. So e-learning course, they had an app that they built that was xAPI enabled, so they could do a simulation. The team comes in, the supervisor on the app is taking notes and clicking things off, and it's all xAPI enabled. So they give them the e-learning course, and it's like the paddle placement during a Code Blue, and they give it out to 500 people, and 90% miss the question. Like, these are doctors and nurses who should know this. So obviously, hospital administrators probably freak out. But what they ultimately found out through having more granular data is nobody actually saw the button to take the assessment. So it wasn't that people were failing it, they didn't know it was there, and they missed it. So one of the big things, as we relate this to designers in doing that, even if you're just doing your first xAPI project for yourself, how are people using this? I'm not going to do anything else with, I don't even care who's doing it. I just want to see what they're doing. You can anonymize it. Our first projects that we did for e-learning, we put a random generated 8-digit number in as the actor. I didn't care who was doing it. I just want to know what they were doing. And those are great use cases and great examples for designers to use to see, are people using this like I thought they would, or do I need to make changes to my design to maybe make it more accessible for people? So that's kind of one of my go-tos, because they learn something from it. Whereas in the past with a SCORM type thing where they see 90% fail, I might go out as an administrator and say, okay, we've got to go train our staff now. And now I'm wasting probably hundreds of thousands of dollars training staff when it was simply a button that was missed.
I love that.
There's that kind of feedback, right? There's the actual interface stuff. So if we go back to the use case we were talking about before, which is, are people using my resources? Is that something that I can do currently in Storyline, or not really? I can't tell if they're like clicking on their resources and things like that.
So you can find, do they click on the resources? Do they download something? Sarah Bauer has a comment in the chat here, could talk about informal and social collaborative learning, right? Or how often they reach out for help. So there's you can connect up Slack or, one of your discussion tools. There's Yet Analytics built a Slack connector. And so the xAPI Cohort Slack channel is somewhere recording to an LRS data. It's not looking at what is being said. It's simply saying, posted, responded, posted, responded. And without text analysis, just knowing who is talking, maybe less interesting. We had some fun on our Slack channel at the office here, where we tried to win Slack. And so instead of typing a sentence, we would put one word on every single line, and you'd type vertically, and you'd get the most statements, right? And so it was really good to see, how it could be gamed. But then also, right, so if you use something like Mobile Coach or a chat bot, right, how many times do and who does reach out for help? What are they asking? Was an answer given? What was that conversation like? And here's the thing, right? And David's question, right? Can you correlate time spent on slide with performance for that content? Absolutely, right? So many people have said to me, does xAPI do XYZ? xAPI doesn't itself do anything. It doesn't make you coffee. It won't send you an email or schedule a calendar or what, or tell me, if you improve. But it gives me the data, right? It's the interoperable standard or specification that gives me the data by which I can tell whether or not those things are happening, right? And I can aggregate those. So any one of those tools, Slack, Mobile Coach, my coffee pot, well, maybe not my coffee pot, but they have their own internal data and analytics, and that's great, but I don't want to manage my L&D tools or my anything tools by tool, because then that's just siloed data. I want to manage across all of the ways in which someone learns how to make coffee. So if I have the Slack channel about coffee and my connoisseurs Slack group, am I then consulting the chatbot about coffee? And then do I make a cup of coffee? That is then useful information across platforms that I can tell in one place.
Yeah, and oftentimes, I tell people that xAPI isn't going to be the answer. It's going to be the start of a lot more questions. And it really starts conversations, and it helps guide conversations. So, to Megan's point, you're collecting a lot of data. We can process that data, but it's not going to be the answer. I get asked that question a lot of, it's going to tell me everything I want to know. Yes, it can, but it also just makes a more intelligent conversation. So as you're, reviewing data and looking at usage patterns and looking at what people are doing, it really informs that conversation. And again, I've thought a lot about this over the last week, trying to tie it back to designers, but it's really helping you go talk to your end users and figure out, what questions should I be asking and how can I be better informed going into those conversations.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I was going to say there's a question in here about, with xAPI, would it be possible to correlate the time spent on a particular slide with the performance on a test question? Which sounds to me plausible, but you're the one who knows.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and there's a couple of ways in which you capture time on a slide. And so in fact, to Sean's question, that gives you a lot of, right, you get data to ask a lot of questions, right? How do you want to capture time on a slide? The first time on a slide, repeat access to a slide, and how many attempts does it take to answer the question? All that is super interesting and things I can't get out of SCORM easily. I might then take it the next step and say, that's great. If my expected performance is passing a test, like I'm doing test prep, then absolutely correlating content and types of content and things like that to passing a question, totally. But in a lot of things that people teach, we want to know more than just, can I pass a test question? Like, can I do it in the real world? So can I take a course on Sean's engineering software, and then does that help me get through the engineering software faster and better? That's a really interesting question.
I'm wondering, so it's come such a long way from when we first had it introduced to sort of the learning sphere, and there was questions about what did we want it to do, what was it going to do, what was it missing? Is there still stuff you think is missing, or things that you want to see on the horizon for xAPI to develop into? Like, what are some of your dreams for it?
A word in edgewise.
Yeah, I would love to see the major rapid tools make it easier for people to get involved with it. I think that's still, a big thing that, a lot of people don't get involved because they've got a storyline. They're not comfortable with JavaScript. They don't want to change their tool or can't change their tool. So rather than get a SCORMy type output, it's just something that doesn't happen. So, being able to get those tool vendors to understand that, there's a lot of benefit coming out of this. I think that would be huge. I mean, I still see that, again, as just the biggest blocker for a lot of people coming in.
I have a wish list. It's the holiday season. I'm allowed to have a wish list.
Absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely right. Better data out of e-learning tools. I would like more non-e-learning L&D tools to be using it. As I go around the expo, I'm one of those obnoxious people. I go up and down the expo halls. I'm like, hey, that's a really cool tool. Does it do xAPI? And the funny thing is that people used to say, oh, lady, any API you want. I'm like, no. I want xAPI, not any API. But now they're coming to me and they're saying, hey, I want my data where everybody else's data is. Like, now you got it, right? That's the key, right? So that's super exciting. I'd like to be getting data from non-e-learning tools, right? I want Salesforce sending that data. I want manufacturing systems sending that data. Sarah, some of the LXPs are already using xAPI, some of them aren't. Your mileage is going to vary on that. I would like the continued work to, Michael, I'm going to, each LRS is a silo. Actually, we've done some really interesting projects where we're multicasting from one learning record provider to multiple LRSs, or auto forwarding from one to the other to create a federated net of LRSs that are filtering and sending specific sets of data to others, which allows you to get some really interesting, more complex platforms. But profiles, I think, are going to be really interesting for us. So it was super easy, relatively, for e-learning tools to adopt xAPI in a very SCORMy way, because SCORM provided a profile, which is like, trying to, what the best, if SCORM is a vocabulary and xAPI is a grammar, I think a profile is like those little translator books that you used to have before Google did it for you, that said, when we talk about this, this is how I use it. This is how you conjugate this verb. This is how you little grammar for each language, but for each subset. So the e-learning-ish, the SCORM profiles is very simple, and it's, here's how we talk about questions and results and correct answers and incorrect answers and how we keep track of that. And that's pretty easy because it was already laid down by SCORM. There's a lot of work done on how do we, as an industry, agree to how we talk about video. What are the events that we're going to all talk about a video? How are we going to talk about that so that I can get a video from one source and a video from another source, kind of like SCORM, put them both in my same package and run a report. So actually, yes, Holly, that's the word I need. It's taxonomy, right? So a profile says, here's how we're going to use these words. There's a profile, believe it or not, for early childhood development that includes things like picked up, dropped off, defecated, urinated, ate, slept, woke up. Like, this is awesome, right? And so what they've done is they have boiled down the essential activities of a very young child into the thing, they do lots of things, but we've boiled them down to the things we care about tracking. And pooped is a verb, not pooped. But that'd be awesome. So profiles, I think, will help make it much more geek-free.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. The profile server project seems to be moving us well into that direction. I did want to go back to the point you made about the LRS as a silo. The multiple LRSs is one way to get around that. The other thing is an LRS isn't like an LMS in the fact that, okay, I have an LMS, I get data in it. The only place I can view that data is in the LMS. So when I look at xAPI, the LRS is not the end-all be-all. What I'm doing with that data is, in a lot of cases, taking it out somewhere else, like a Tableau or some other type of visualization that I can then potentially combine it with other data from other systems, or if I've translated data from those other systems into xAPI and put it into a single database, I'm pulling that out somewhere where I'm going to visualize it. A lot of companies now, especially, have data groups, and they're really good with those tools. So we don't have to depend on, the LRS or the what we're used to in L&D is the behemoth LMS that is the end all of everything. Now we can choose those different pieces. So yes, the LRS is going to collect the data for us, but now we can choose the best-in-class visualization tool that builds up our learning ecosystem. We're not stuck with just that quote-unquote silo. We can move that data around. We can take it into other visualization things. So, I get that question a lot of what's the difference between an LMS and an LRS. And I mean, they're two completely different animals. Someone had asked it earlier, if I have an LRS, can I get rid of the LMS? And not really. There's a lot of things that the LMS still needs to do, like user management, some of those things. So it really depends on your use case if you're able to do that.
Okay, I'll have you do the elevator speech on that one too. When somebody asks that question, an LMS versus an LRS, what's your concise answer to that?
The LRS is a data collection mechanism, and the LMS does everything else. It's content management, it's people management, it's ultimately storage of credentials and things like that. While we can use the LRS to trigger some of that, that's really not where you're going to store that information.
Yeah, if you have an LMS today, you probably need one. It hosts your content. It's the library. It gets bashed a lot, right? Just like PowerPoint gets bashed, but all four of us use PowerPoint when we give presentations, and the PowerPoint, right? Our PowerPoint's not bad. I don't know about yours, right? My PowerPoint.
Well, a few of mine are, but that's okay.
Right, but so it's what people do with it, right? So the LMS serves a lot of really useful functions. It can hold the library for an organization, for a person of what am I supposed to know here? And I know we all want learning everywhere and we're in the point of need and all that stuff, but there is a value in formal learning and saying, here's what we expect for you out of your job and where those things should be, so you don't have to hope that you stumble on them in your workday. I think that's really valuable, and we love as an industry to bash the LMS, and I think we just we can bash bad PowerPoint, not the product itself. And so, yeah, and I've seen some really interesting use cases. I love the LMSs that have a fully functional LRS inside, because then you get the best of both worlds, right? So there's Duncan Welder and our working team at Risk have this great visualization with xAPI data from a social learning platform dumped into the LMS. Now, your social learning platform, your Slack, whatever, your Yammer and stuff, doesn't know your org tree. It knows who you talk to and what you say and how many things and whether or not you write long vertical sentences in order to win it. But it doesn't know who you report to or what org groups you're in. And so when you dump that data into the LMS that knows those things and which you've been formally trained, now you can answer some of the questions. And if you scroll up on the chat are in there, I can correlate my formal and my informal, which is really, really awesome. The trick is that not all of the LMSs have fully functional LRSs inside. And so and they've done it, I believe, as a defensive strategy, because they can then control the data that they have, but they may not allow data that doesn't get launched from sources inside the LMS. And so they're missing a big piece of that puzzle. So it's worth really poking and prodding your LMS provider to ask them about it. But you get the best of both worlds if you have the two in one.
So if you have to find an LRS, do you have one that you recommend is easy for the beginner user to use or is cost effective? Is there something you prefer over others?
From an LRS perspective?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have not found that I can make a single recommendations on LRS space, because everybody's got their own unique needs and each one kind of like they're stacking up into an interesting niche. Because keep in mind, there's only like half a dozen commercially viable LRS providers out there. So Yet and Watershed, if you've got global learning data, you need, and Learning Locker, right? If you need, if you have global learning data, which is considered personal information, you've got to have something that is going to be, really robust and hang on to those things. I think that Veracity does out of the box. It does a really nice job handling some of the stuff that does with profiles. It's got lovely, luscious stuff, and it's got an, maybe the other ones do too. It's got an export my data button. Talk about the audacity of having like the auto eject pilot, like the pilot seat that you eject from a plane. You can move your data very easily with a lot of these. So different people are going to go to different things. And then, everybody's got a free trial offer of some sort. So you can be, experimenting with multiple ones. Yeah,
I think the big thing there to the point is start with one that you feel comfortable with. You know, there's SCORM Cloud, which, okay, doesn't have a lot of features, but in about 30 seconds, you can be up and running. The other ones all, you know, aren't much worse than that for the most part. They all have their kind of free tiers, or at least trials that you can get in. Sometimes it's a monthly, you know, 2,000 statements a month, something like that. So to get yourself started, typically that works great. Most have an export button. SCORM Cloud does not. So that one, you know, if you're just testing, I use it because you can pretty much send anything to it. So it works really well for that, just for basic testing. But you can move the data. So if you're testing with something, you move into a little bit more productionized mode, and then you decide you want to go to a different LRS, you absolutely can export your data and move it to somewhere else. And I've done it 3 or 4 times in probably a total of about 30 minutes. And, you know, there was a white paper years ago.
I love this.
Who was it? It was Learning Locker, Rusticy with Watershed, and the now defunct Saltbox.
Saltbox, yeah.
But those three vendors got together and wrote a paper passing data between their 3 LRSs. And I would have no doubt that Veracity and Risk and all of those guys, you can move the data between those as well. So what you're looking for, and Megan, if I get this wrong, yell at me. You're looking for compliant, right? Is that the word? Conformant.
There is no such thing as compliant.
There's no such
thing.
Actually,
you're looking for compliant, because if they say they are, you know they don't know what they're talking about.
Yes. So there is a list on the ADL website of conformant LRS software vendors.
I'll go grab it.
And if they say that they're compliant, turn around and walk away. If they say they're conformant, you're good. And if they don't know what that means, run away.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, so what if I have a designer who really wants to try to start to figure this out? And obviously the first answer is they should join the xAPI cohort, which I think is this tremendous resource that you run. But if they were sort of saying, well, I have Storyline or I have Captivate, or, you know, one of those, what could I, you know, and I can fund one of the less expensive LRSs or whatever it is. What could they kind of do out of the box right now? I know it's pretty limited, and you sort of alluded to that, but like somebody who really just wants, you know, to get their feet wet and maybe doesn't have the JavaScript chops to add on to it at this point.
I would say that they use the out of the box functionality just to familiarize themselves with what xAPI looks like. Okay, what the output looks like, because you're going to get a statement. It's going to say actor experienced a slide, but there's a lot more data below that you can get yourself familiar with. And honestly, I did not know a single thing about JavaScript before I started with an xAPI project, and I can almost guarantee that once you look at it, it's very readable, and it's something that you can do. So it's just, you know, publishing out an xAPI, getting your feet wet with the statements and what they look like, that would be the first step to me. And then, you know, take that next step of, let me see if I can make a little JavaScript work. And especially back to the MedStar example of, you know, let me just as a designer look and see how people are using the content that I'm creating.
All right, Megan?
Pretty much what Sean said, right? So your e-learning tools are out of the box, going to send something. If you wanted to get beyond that, their Survey Gizmo, unfortunately, you have to buy up. You have to have a corporate license. It doesn't come with some of the cheaper ones. The Survey Gizmo actually sends xAPI data from just surveys. And I've seen some really interesting things. Amir Bar from Halliburton is basically shipping out e-learning on a Survey Gizmo platform. He loads up a piece of media, asks some questions, it's really solid branching, and he's getting xAPI data and sending it to an LRS out of that, which was pretty darn cool. Kaltura also, if you're into video, kind of video streaming, that's another outside the L&D space, but tools that L&D people tend to use, that send xAPI data. But more and more tools are doing this now. But I generally see people start with e-learning first. Or go find a friend in IT or a software developer, because it's not hard. It's hard if you're like me and you don't know where all the colons and brackets go in order to make software. But I did it just as a test once. We needed to build a demo for an xAPI thing we were pulling together at a DevLearn a few years ago. And I literally hired a software developer off the street. I said, this is what I want the tool to do. And here's the specification I want you to do it with. And he looked at it, he's like, all right. It's not hard, right? It's just, okay, it's how I'm going to send data. Okay.
Yep. And with our first software project, that's what we did is I handed it to a developer and 2 hours later we were making xAPI statements. So for them, like literally for a developer, they're going to look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, no problem.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin has a really, really important question in the chat, and I want to address this. Does your LRS need to be able to read xAPI statements, or is that a native function? And I've actually heard it the other way around is, do I need an LRS in order to do xAPI? So an LRS is the defined tool, and it's the rules. There's like 1,300 different tests to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. But it is the defined data store for xAPI. It doesn't accept data in any other format other than xAPI. If you're going to send xAPI data, you need an LRS to read it because nothing else reads it. I mean, you can read it or you can write it to a CSV or Google Sheet or whatever you want to do, but if you want to practically use it, you'll need an xAPI or you'll need an LRS. So by definition, they all are. But it's a really good foundational question, so I'm really glad you asked.
Okay.
I'm going to pull one last question. Is that, or you got something else there?
Go for it.
I got one last question that I think we missed up. Was Tina Marie asked earlier that they're exploring VR learning design using Unity 3D, and what are the challenges they can expect if they want to go with xAPI?
I got a few.
Okay.
So, and this is actually something that we're working on right now. So there's a few things. So right now, there does not exist a profile for virtual reality, and I think there are at least 2 teams working on them. There is a lot of data you could be getting. So that's one thing. So this is, I mean, just if you think about all the data that exists, what I'm finding that's really interesting is that the folks that I've talked to, at least, who are doing a lot of virtual reality and a lot of Unity 3D, the concept of reporting does not come up high on their list. So I say, what are the things you report on? And they're like, I don't know, how long somebody spent? I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so squirmy. Right? So I'm really making friends everywhere I go. But looking at, I think, so one of the challenges is aside from, building it and getting the right learning experience, is figuring out of all the things I'm doing in that experience, what's the equivalent of defecate and pick up and those simple things that we can at least start with from a data collection perspective. It's there, it's easy, and not easy, but I mean, getting the data out is feasible. There have been actually several, even just cohort projects, so people working on the side. And Tina Marie, we should talk, because that's one of the use cases I'm looking at as well with criminal justice.
All right. Well, we're just about at time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. You've already given us a bunch of links to find you, but go ahead and give us this is your shameless plug opportunity. Megan and Sean, is there anything you would like to promote or anything you'd like us to know about, or where can we find you?
Go, Sean, I got to go get a link.
All right. I'll put it in the chat here as well, but learnxapi.com is an area that we put some resources out there that you can certainly go there and learn about the basics of xAPI. Lots of resources there. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out and ask questions or any information that you need.
All right, and we will collect all of these links into the show notes, and so when we post the video on YouTube and stuff, we'll have all the links for the different things that we've kind of put up here.
Awesome. Yeah, and so we've got This Friday, December 13th, we're hosting the xAPI party in Michigan and online. So there is 4 sets of things actually happening at any one time if you come to our office in Michigan. And then if you check it out online, we have all the demos from xAPI Cohort this fall and a few other non-e-learning tools demos that use xAPI. So it's a free event. If you come to Michigan, we'll even buy you drinks and lunch.
Wow, fantastic!
If you do the virtual version, you're on your own.
So it's the demo fest of xAPI Cohort, sort of?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay.
Yes, the
Fantastic.
non-competitive.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And yay, I'm excited. And I think one of the big takeaways is even if you're at that sort of, I'm operating within these authoring tools and stuff, the idea of kind of getting yourself set up a little bit. And, the other thing I would mention about that is the authoring tool people are responsive to what they get asked for. So, I had the conversation with somebody from Articulate a while back, and this is a few years ago now, but I was like, well, what about, being able to kind of do custom xAPI statements out of Storyline? And they were like, well, nobody's asking for that really. So, they're going to prioritize the features that people are asking for. So if you want this stuff, you should just let them know that it would be great. So,
and a lesson I have learned is get those requests into their actual support lines. So if they've got a support feature on their website, get it there rather just in their community forums. It's their support lines that get the most bang for your buck of what you're asking and requesting for.
See, there you go. All right. Okay, Tracy, what have you got to shamelessly plug?
I've got the Canadian e-learning conferences coming back up next summer in Toronto, June 25th and 26th, and we've got the call for speaking proposals out right now. So you can find us canadianelearning.ca, and we'd love to have you come out and join us.
All right, fantastic. And where can people find you, Tracy?
Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm all over. You can find me
all the places.
All the places. I'm there.
All right. So my shameless plug is I'm going to do a year-end coupon, which we'll put in the show notes as well, for Design Better Learning. We have a course out there that is called Sticky Learning, and it's about designing learning for engagement. And also I'm booking on-site workshops for Q1 and Q2 right now. So if anybody's got that lovely year-end budget that they're looking to spend, happy to have that conversation with you. So
excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy holiday season. This stuff we'll get all these show notes, as Julie said, posted to the Nerdy Shop Talk webpage. And we will also get it up on the Guild's YouTube website. You'll have this will be recorded and saved there as well. So you'll be able to find us in a couple different places. And Nerdy Shop Talk's also on Twitter. You can find us there to find out when our next episode will be, which should be sometime early spring, maybe late winter.
Probably, we're going to aim for late winter, probably.
Late winter sounds better to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Sean and Megan.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, nerds.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.